for being here today. Let's do call to order. We'll take roll call, and we'll start on this side.
Jared Talbot, representing the school board.
Scott Gross, Business Administrator.
Evelyn Redmond, Budget Committee.
Joe Alexander. Frank Hobbs.
Lauren Dukas. Samantha Kearns.
Gail LeBruck.
Richard Manzo.
Richard Fletcher, Village Law President.
Bill Cordis.
Kelly Boyer, Select Board Rep.
Laura Stevens.
Stacy Belmore, Vice Chair.
Melanie Renfrew Hebert, Chair. Okay, if we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So the purpose of our meeting today is to hear the school board's presentation on any changes that they had to their budget. And I will turn that over to, is it you, Jared? To Jared.
Thank you, everybody. What you're going to see in the packets is kind of the summary sheet, so I just want to kind of set the table for where we are with the school board. So what you're seeing here is our 2023 general fund budget. This is what was approved last March. And then what we have below it is the proposed 2024 general budget, which we'll be looking at today. And you see the differences between our current proposed and our current baseline budget that we have, an increase of 3.3%. When we look at our general fund for our default budget, it's $48,424,496. So that is our default budget. If for any reason, whatever we propose to the town, the voters don't approve our proposed budget, this would be our default that we would automatically be kicked in. The difference between our default budget and the budget being proposed and approved by the school board and being sent here for review is $294,161, which brings up our proposed general fund budget, $48,718,657. So what the bottom two numbers are really is the difference between our proposed and default is less than 1%, 0.63%, and the difference between our proposed 2024 budget, which we are reviewing now, and our current approved budget by the voters is $1,839,998. So we are looking at a general increase of a little under 4% from our default budget this year, or the budget approved this year, to our proposed budget that we're bringing forward. What you'll see in the proposed budget appropriations, these are the numbers that are actually going to be on the warrant. So we have the general fund budget, which is the monies that we use out of our Fund 10 that everybody gets a copy of every month. And then we have our food service budget, which is, we say sustaining, but it's something that's part of our overall appropriations. So our food service budget is $1,293,523. And then you see the special revenue fund budget of $2.5 million. Again, these two, we really don't have much control over from a school board perspective, but Scott, I'll let you kind of explain the fund details.
So your food service budget is funded primarily by students who are paying for breakfast and lunch, as well as state and federal revenues. So we get revenues from USDA and different state and federal sources, but the lion's share of it happens to come from revenues from food sales in most typical years. The last 2 years, we had a free lunch program, and in that case, we had almost zero. We had very nominal amounts of revenues coming in from school lunch sales, and it was almost entirely from federal sources, but that program ended. On the special revenue fund budget, that's also called the grants budget, and that includes what's called IDEA, which is pretty much individual with disabilities. So that's your special ed grants that we get, roughly around 600,000. We get grants that are called title type grants, and these are based upon students who might not be reading at grade level. It has to deal with some of its free and reduced lunch counts. So these are kids who might come from economically disadvantaged homes. We get some grants for professional development for our staff. In the past, we've gotten very nominal grants for things like robotics, et cetera. The other biggie, and the reason why we're at $2.5 million is what we've talked about for the last 2 years, and those are ESSER grants. And those were grants that the federal government provided to school districts. Municipalities also got them, but they called them something different. And those grants had two primary purposes: to address the impacts of COVID, and also it was a stimulus. So at the time, if you recall, it was to try to stimulate the economy by having projects that would generate economic activity. And so we've done one of those projects, which is windows, but we're going to have another couple of projects that we think are going to be spending about $1.5 million on in that given year. So a lot of times people say, oh my God, the budget went up by, let's just say, $2.5 million. Well, if the grants part of that is not coming from taxation, but it has to be, as Jared said, gross appropriated with an offsetting revenue. And that's always confusing, I think, for some folks. But that was it, Jared. I mean, so we focus here, Budget Committee, on the general fund budget, which is the one that that's funded by taxation and also by adequacy from the state and some other sources. You have a copy of your food service budget there. That's, again, self-sustaining. And the grants, we don't build a budget until we're in that particular year, because we honestly don't know if we're going to be doing a certain project. If we don't do a project, there is no harm, no foul. You don't spend what you don't have on the grant side.
So as we move forward, what we'd like to try to do, Mr. Chair, is we want to go through the general fund reviews. And then, as well as the food service, we'll definitely present to the board. And then later on, we don't have it right now, but there are going to be other warrant articles that will come before the board. Namely, we do have a GSS union contract coming up for a lot of our support staff. That will be a warrant article, as well as most likely a CRF will be coming to this group as well. So a majority of our time is going to be spent on looking at our budgets here, but we will have other items coming to the board as they are available.
Thank you, Jared. Could you clarify ahead of time whether or not you will be taking questions after each line, or if you'd like us to wait to a certain point?
Since Mr. Gross is going through it, I know that traditionally we have reviewed page by page, and then if there are questions on any page, the chair has the ability to recognize those individuals with questions.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. We do have new members.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was hoping to kind of explain. So for those who are relatively new or new members, we've typically gone page by page, and there's an opportunity there to ask Jared and myself questions. I will always shy away from questions that might be related to school board or school board policy. For those who don't know, your focus is on the dollars. It is Jared as the elected official for the school, and Kelly, let's say, for the select board. If it's a policy thing, if you're saying, hey, why do you have class sizes of X or Y? Well, that's not really a budgetary thing. It has budget implications, don't get me wrong, but that's something that I would probably duck away from, because it's not for discipline of students. If something is like way out, like it's not budget related, I wouldn't know the answer to it, or I'd basically say, hey, that's not really a budget related type of question. But for the most part, in my experiences the last 4 years, we've been able to respond to almost every question. If I don't know the answer, and there's a likelihood I might not know the answer to something pretty specific, I will then get you that answer in a day or two. I will find out that answer and I'll email it to you.
And there are opportunities, like we had last year, where I know our vice chair had a specific question that we needed a principal to talk about.
Yeah.
We were able to have the principal come in and talk about that as well. So whenever there's an opportunity to do that, we'll definitely do that, to answer whatever questions as they arise.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for the clarification on it. Sorry to steal your thunder about, how we were going to do it. And I think, Joe, you had a question?
Thank you, I do. I have two questions. So my first question is for Scott regarding the ESSER grant funding.
Yeah.
Are any of those dollar amounts going to anything other than one-time expenses?
Or any of those
Like, do you
amounts.
have like kind of a
Yeah. I think I
a
can-
set a line of
Yeah. So
what it's
that-
going to?
So that
'Cause
is, yes.
I'm curious and I'm concerned that like it's gonna inflate the budget.
Yeah, in your packet that I provided to you, that was in your school board packet, I believe, in that presentation, it talked about what was in there for ESSER. So there are a handful of things that are, we explained that in the presentation, that were teacher position related, that we have absorbed into, so we moved positions around, Joe. So we had a teacher who might have like left through attrition, and then we moved, so a good example is Bartlett special education teacher. That was ESSER funded in 2 years. Now it's no longer ESSER funded, but it's part of this budget, but it's being funded by a position that's being repurposed, okay? Everything else is our one-time thing. So we spent $1 million on window project, that's a one-timer. We spent money on other things that are one-time. There are a couple of things that may go forward in future years. So one of them that I know off the top of my head that was ESSER funded, that is now in this budget, is the Schoology. We grant funded that, and that's your learning management system. That is now a reoccurring expense.
Scott? If I could just direct everyone, that's on page 12 of the handout for the school.
Okay, I still have a question.
Did that answer your question,
It
Jeff?
did,
Thank you. I think you had a question from Kelly first?
Was yours connected to that, Gail?
What's that?
Was your question
Mine
connected?
was connected to the ESSER grants.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Scott, with the ESSER grant, did they kind of dictate, not necessarily the specifics, but the categories or whatever where you can spend the money?
There was a pretty wide allowance of what it could be spent on, and they gave each school district, municipalities the same thing, or these are the categories that you could spend it on. So, one of them was pretty wide open in terms of windows, doors, et cetera. Then, that was pretty specific, I should say. Then the other ones were addressing the needs that will help continue the operations of schools. Well, that's pretty wide open. But what you should know, Gail and others, is that when we apply to use the funds, we have to file a grant activity or an application with the state of New Hampshire, the Department of Education. They then determine the eligibility or the allowability based upon their interpretation of the law. So every one of these things that we have spent money on has been approved by the state of New Hampshire, the Board of Ed, not the board, but the Department of Ed.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gail. Kelly, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Just looking off the summary page, the total proposed for 2024 from the presentation to this page is 242,000. Was there anything specific or like price increase?
It was health insurance,
Okay.
Kelly. So we had budgeted a guaranteed maximum rate, which was predicated on 10 years of what our actual increases were, which was about 6.5%. Our guaranteed maximum rate on the school side came in at 11.5%. What we have seen we've seen pretty stable health insurance rates over the last few years. We received actually a credit because folks during COVID weren't going for medical procedures. Then what happened is I think folks then did a lot. But it's all based upon our group. So it's SAU 19 group, which is New Boston, Goffstown, and the SAU building itself. The town of Goffstown is their own, it's what's called insurance rating or claims group. And I was jealous because Danielle said, we only had a very modest, and I'm like, that'll be good for us, and it wasn't even close. So they don't track similarly. So last year, ours wasn't too bad. I think it was around 5 or 6%, and the town got hammered on the health insurance side. This year, the town wasn't so bad and the school got hammered. So, just so you know, everything there is related to, health insurance.
Yeah, I couldn't see anything in particular,
Yep,
but I
it's-
figured it was
It's health
something.
insurance and health insurance only.
And then just a technical question on the whole packet itself, on the FY24 new spending. Is there anything with the numbers that are in parentheses versus ones that aren't? Is that just a formatting thing, or is there anything in particular with those numbers?
Can you give me a page number?
Sure, the one I'm on, let me see if I can find one closer.
It will be a negative, which means that.
So on page 31, if we look at line
Yep.
739, it has 500 in parentheses, it's a
It's
reduction.
a reduction, so when we went through it, we felt that that we could reduce that line by that amount of money.
Just wanted to clarify
Yep.
before we dive in. And then just an overview question. It's on a couple places. Can you just remind me non-capital software? What is that?
Non-capital software,
Mm-hmm.
that would be software for, let's say, our media center, where it's, it could be anything from foreign language software, it could be education, more education type related, as opposed to an Office 365 license.
Thank you.
Yes.
So just to go off of that, you actually do list Office 365 under non-capital software in your presentation. So
Okay.
you're saying they're different, right?
Well, I'd have to kind of look I have to look at the codes to be candid with you, but we have different types of software. Some of it is related to like how the hardware operates, operating type software, and then there's others that might be related to students who might have reading challenges. It's software that deals with that, and there are two different ones. So the biggest one that you want to look at is not so much capital, non-capital, because this is how the chart of accounts might have been built like 20 years ago. What you want to look at is that program number, and that program number is on the one with actuals on it.
Yep.
It is the column 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth column from the left. And program number 18 is education related. Program number 16 is more technical related. So if you, like an Office 365 license should have a 16 next to it.
Should.
It should, and if it doesn't, then let us know. And one of the things that I've learned in this is now my 5th year doing this, is that I call it budget cleanup every single year. It's like, this was coded wrong.
Yeah.
It does happen. It seems like I clean up at least 15 to 20 things year to year, and I basically beg your indulgence to say, okay, let it go for now, and then next year I'll make sure that I move it into the right category. So it happens all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Are there any other questions before they begin? Yes, Joe?
This might be a question for the chair. Is there an intention to deliberate on lines tonight? Like, is that your intention, is to start going through?
Yes.
Okay. I just kind of have a bit of a problem with that, seeing how we got the actual budget via email 3 days ago. We were notified of the meeting 6 days ago, and we just got paper copies of it tonight. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
I feel like maybe it might be a good idea to maybe talk about like food service or something else, but to look actually into the budget, I feel like isn't really fair to like the people that voted for us to look at the budget. So I don't know what anybody thinks about this, but.
Oh, thank you.
Although I agree, this is exactly how we did it last year. So, I mean, it worked fine, but I'm open to having a discussion. But this is the same conversation that was brought up last year at this meeting when we had different people up here. So we didn't get it till like 2 days before. I'm thinking the same situation. So that's just mine.
Thank you. And to add to that, we did kind of build this meeting in quickly to follow that same pattern from last year. But I will keep it open for discussion about that and whether we want to move forward with looking at it. Yes, Lauren?
Thank you. To refresh my memory, we have 3 meetings tentatively scheduled for school board, or 4?
I think we
for
have,
the, not school
we
board,
have
excuse me, for the
3
school
and
budget.
1 that we may or may not need.
Right, but so I mean, if we came into it and said, ooh, we want to come back to this, we can say, I would like to come back to that line at another time. Just because we go through a page at this point doesn't mean that next week we can't say, let's talk about that line again for clarification.
Right, we can seek clarification on it now, we can go through it now, we don't need to deliberate on it now if everyone doesn't feel that they've had their questions answered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Should we move forward, please?
Yeah, I would say, as, if we do move forward, I look at this as any opportunity like any others. Is if we have questions, let's ask questions. I would say if there's motions based on our questions, let's ask those motions, and if we need to change things, let's definitely change things. But I'm in concurrence that the budget's open until we finish deliberations, which could be 4 meetings from now. And then, the lines are always open, we can always go back, just as long as we have the right people to actually talk about those items. I think that's the important thing, is to have the subject matter experts present to present, or to respond to any questions.
Agreed, thank you. With that, can we, are you doing this, Scott?
Yeah,
So-
actually, the chair is the one that
Right.
would go through page by page to say, it's your prerogative, Ms. Chair, to say, okay, anybody have any questions on page 1?
Absolutely.
Wait a few moments, it would be my recommendation, and then when you're ready and you felt that there's an appropriate time, you would say, let's move on to page 2, and
Yep.
go on from there.
Thank you, and I appreciate your guidance.
Madam Chair, can I have one more question?
Yes.
Which one are we gonna go off of, though?
So I want to be clear here is that I gave a copy of the notes to the chair and the vice chair electronically. I think others have that, but we should go over the actual.
okay.
So typically, when budget committees get it, the notes honestly are intended for the users of the budget, myself, principals, et cetera, to say, oh, where do I go? But it does provide an explanation. So typically, when you have a question here, I can quickly go, oh, it's this. So that's.
Thank you.
I think that's how most municipalities and school districts, do it. If you want a copy, then certainly kind of let me know. I think I have a couple extra here, but it's intended to say, this is the vendor that we use, so we can do a quick search, and that's how we pay that particular invoice when it comes in.
Thank you, Scott, for the clarification. Okay, so if there's no other questions? Hearing none, we should move on.
I do have a procedural or process thing, because we did this with the school board and it worked out, is that you'll note that there are page numbers on the bottom right, and then on the left-hand column, you're going to see reference number. And you'll see that as you go through, it goes all the way to like line 1,500 and change. So if you do have a question, please reference the reference line number on that particular page, and this way we all know what we're talking about.
Thank you,
Okay.
Scott. Any other questions, comments? No. So let's take a look at page 1. Is there any questions on page 1?
I do.
Yes, Evelyn?
I'd like to know a little more about the increase in the teacher sub-salaries, and you said 18, that's special ed?
Regular ed.
Regular ed.
So
Okay.
functional
General ed.
Functional 1100 is the general ed that we have. And as we can see, if we look at our actuals, 2020, that was a COVID year. We weren't
Right.
really doing substitutes within classes. But as we move forward, you can see that we've had an increased need in substitutes. So in order to make sure that we match our actuals, we've increased it by asked for the $30,000 increase for our budget line.
And can you delve a little bit more into the cause of that? I know that we have a new contract, teachers this year, and you were able to hire more to fill the positions you had open that were needed, you needed subs to fill?
Yeah, so I can explain that. The driver of this teacher substitute line is the wages that we're paying these substitutes. So we used to pay $65, $70, $75 for a substitute to come in. That equates to like $10 or $12 an hour. You can't get substitutes. So what happens is you then need to pay more. So what we did was we had to increase the substitute rate of pay, and then we even put another sweetener on it to say if you work more than 20 days in a given school year will give you, I forgot what the amount is in big, I'm so sorry, it's like another $10 a day or $20 a day for those who are truly committed to coming into the schools day after day. This line also includes long-term substitutes. So these are situations where you might have a maternity leave, you could have a teacher that goes out on a surgery, mental health, whatever it is, whatever you would see in your own private worlds. You have to cover for somebody anywhere from a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, or longer. It would go under that. It'd be a long-term sub. So I can tell you that in the year of 2022, we had maternity type leaves, which kind of blew that one up. So I was thinking that some of you would say, hey, how come you only increased it by 30 when your actual support a heck of a lot more? Part of it is that was trying to find that new normal with COVID, and we know we had a lot of long-term subs. I think we're erring on the side of it being more conservative versus asking for another 70 or more. And that's kind of the philosophy there. So it's increased rate of pay for subs, incentivizing subs who really come in every day, and then dealing with the long-term sub situations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this page? Page 1? Hearing none, we'll move on to page 2. Any questions on page 2? Yes, Lauren?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, to come back to a reference line 46, is that 39,450 Schoology? Or is that for the new spending for non-capital software, or?
Yeah, so on this one, I'll give you kind of there's several. So we provide, historically, we provided our teachers with laptops. Next year, if you recall, we did receive a pretty substantial grant of $400 per device, and those all came in. We are now giving our paraprofessionals, as well as a couple of other key individuals within the district, such as our head cooks, head custodians, with a laptop. With that, now we have more devices that we're giving to employees. That has Office 365 implications, firewall protections, you name it. So that's one piece of it. We've had increases in our cost for firewall, that cost. We also have what's called FileWave, which allows us to manage these devices remotely. So if an individual has an issue, we can manage it from we're here and they're at their home, or vice versa. That's called FileWave. In this particular case, the Schoology is not included in this particular line in terms of the notes, but we're seeing a pretty hefty increase in terms of Office 365 licenses, antivirus software, that went up pretty big. We have an obligation to back up our servers every day, and we embarked on a program that we were like 4 years late to the party on. The town was way better. It's called server virtualization. So if you have a problem with a server here at the high school, if it were to get either hacked or destroyed, it's backed up in other buildings. Those have software implication costs, and those have increased. We have also started what's called plagiarism detection. So for those of you who've taken college level courses, you have to submit your paper, and then it determines whether or not you wrote it or not, which we haven't had in the past. And we need to do that because we have more we have more students who are using technology, and just, this is the world that we live in. So those are the ones that are kind of driving, those costs. But we saw just incredible increases that these software vendors, they increased their fees just incredibly. I'd say 8 to 15% in the last year.
Yes,
Thank you.
Samantha.
Line number 37 for other professional services, what are those and why have they increased so substantially?
Okay.
What line?
Just give me 1 second.
37,
37.
Yeah,
other
I know,
professional
I'm
services,
cross-referencing it, so.
like 5,089.
So some of this was for
So-
town services and GTV.
Oh, yeah.
So we actually fund GTV.
Oh, okay.
As part of the agreement we have with the town.
So we switched that. So in years past, we paid for the school resource officer at Mountain View Middle School. So what you're gonna see when you get to Mountain View is that you'll see that that was a minus. And the town asked us to essentially, they would absorb the cost of the Mountain View school resource officer, but could you then pay for GTV, a staff person, as well as a contribution towards the services that are provided by Parks and Rec to the school, like mowing, et cetera. So
Thank you.
they line all of our school fields as well.
Thank you. Any other questions on page 2? No? Moving on to page 3.
Just, Ms. Chair, if I can notate, you're seeing under the
Yes, Chair.
function line, thank you, gotta wait to be called on. You see in the function line, we're going from 1,100 to now 1,200. The difference for that, as you can see from line 55 to 56, when we start talking about the 1,200 lines, this is our special education. So these are specific line items associated with our SPED that we cover at the state, that's mandated and dictated by the state, so.
Right, and oftentimes, that's a really good point, is that I would say the vast majority of the time when it's 1,200 related, it's more of a mandated type of service. So I'm not questioning whether life is fair or not fair, but in the 1100s, it's a bit more discretionary type of thing, but in the 1200s, it's like, no,
Thou shalt do
thou
this.
shalt do it.
Yes.
So that's a good point. So it's a good point.
And thank you for bringing that up. Would you happen to have one more copy of your code form? We have one more new member who has not received it.
Who? It's-
Gail.
Gail, it should be in the packet that, I thought I put that in there. In the one that said school board presentation. And
Scott, you used to color code these, so it's a little more difficult.
It used to be,
Yeah.
it used to be blue.
What page, do you know what page, Scott?
Oh.
88
That's true,
of that
so
packet.
Okay.
you know, I take the feedback that I get, right? So, in fairness,
Do you need us to increase the printing and binding line?
I love you too. So it's like, oh, there's so many loose pages, so it's like, oh, let's put it all in one package, and so, okay. Would you like for the next meeting?
You know what,
would you
I
like
have
me-
it right here, I'll just.
No, I can
put a star on it.
give you a color copy of, then you guys made fun of me because I was kind of colorblind one night, and I remember that too. Yeah.
Scott, we appreciate the handouts that you give us that help us understand this.
Okay.
I think we're good with the white copies. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so are there any questions on, any other questions on page 3? No? Hearing none, we'll move on to page 4.
If I could, Madam Chair,
Yes, Scott.
I just wanted to this is just by means of explanation. So line number 89, this is our contracted services line for special education. So we spend out of this line for a variety of reasons. One of them is we have to provide special education services to students who might be at a charter school, for an example, or if we cannot hire a speech pathologist, which we've had an issue with in this district, we have to then still provide speech services, but we have to hire a contractor to come into our schools. Generally, it's more money to do so. This is one where these are mandated. We have to provide these services. So you'll see these in that base/default column, but you'll see that the actuals are all over the place. So they're all over the place because it could be a year in which we couldn't find like an occupational therapist, and then in the following year we were able to. So I say that because I don't want you to read too much. Sometimes actuals tell stories. In this case, the story behind the actuals fluctuating is if we can't find a staff person, we have to use a contracted service. If we have a student or students who need particular services, whether it's a kid who might have a significant disability that needs a lot of occupational therapy, you might see those things spike in a given year. So you'll see there that we did increase that by about $25,000, and that's just reflective of the cost. So that's kind of baselining it, and then just these providers are allowed to charge anywhere from 5 to 10% more by law as an increase. So in Massachusetts, for an example, it's 14% that the state approved. In New Hampshire, it's 5%. So just so you know the variability there. We do have providers that give us services from not only New Hampshire, but Mass, and in some cases Vermont or Maine, depending on where they're coming from.
Thank you, Scott, for clarifying that. Are there any questions on this page? Yes, Mr. Fletcher?
Scott, can you, it's line 95, the tuition other private. That's a pretty big line. Can you explain what it is?
So these are the students that are being educated outside of the Goffstown School District.
Okay.
All right? And that number changes, and the reason for that education outside of the district is also varies. So we have students who have gone through the juvenile criminal justice system in which the court has stated that these students cannot attend school here in Goffstown, that they pose such a risk that they have to be educated elsewhere. So those are called court-ordered placements, and we have several of those. We have kids who have significant disabilities where they have to be placed at a facility in, say, Massachusetts or up in the Lakes region. And some of these placements, on average, they cost about $80,000 to $100,000 each. So we're not talking about a very large number of kids who comprise this $1.3 million. And I can get you what that number is. When I appear before the school board and they ask me questions, I'm like, time out, I gotta worry about privacy, I can't go into a whole lot of details, but I can tell you that that number is under 20, okay? So these are high dollar costs. In some cases, they're capped, where the state will then step in and pay you like in a court-ordered placement, we pay up to the first $55,000 and the state steps in and pays over that. But you could have some of these placements that are $150,000 or more. We have in a community not so far away from here, they have one student with a residential placement that is almost $500,000. So.
Thank you. I had one question
sorry.
from Samantha.
That was my question. My question's answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Evelyn?
So, do you have a heads up ahead of time?
That's, no. So,
That's,
yes and
I'm
no.
just, right, because I'm wondering, it seems like almost a specific increase number.
yeah, so your specific increase is a 5% increase, which is what the state allows in New Hampshire. The state allows that. Now, Jared knows, I told him this yesterday. I got notified a week ago, after all this is done, that Massachusetts just jacked theirs up 15%. So our budget is such, and I said to Jared, I said, I think that number's gonna be somewhere around $15,000 to $20,000 that impacts us for the kids that we have. We'll just deal, okay? I'm not gonna reopen stuff. But you asked the question, do we know? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So I'm sure most of you don't follow New Boston School Board meetings, but I just appeared at their meeting. They have $175,000 of this year's special ed costs that they didn't budget for. And now we have to talk about their contingency fund, et cetera, because these are kids that moved into their district or that required a court-ordered placement that was not budgeted for. So it strengthens the reason and the rationale to have that contingency fund, because thank God we have it in New Boston, because we could be looking at upwards of $200,000, and they have 1/3 of our budget. So that's the equivalent of having a $600,000 hit on our budget unplanned. So you hope that you never want to use that contingency fund, but in this particular case in New Boston, we might have to. So we probably know 80% to 90%.
Okay.
If that's fair.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. Yes, Frank?
Just to follow up to that, if I would, those are based on the address of the resident, correct?
Can you help me better understand that?
The address of in the example you mentioned,
If they're a resident of Goffstown.
Correct.
Then it's required by law that we have to fund that if they're a school age variety.
Yeah, so anywhere from the age of 3, now all the way to the age of to 22.
22.
Okay, so that was a law change last year. So the legislature, before it was 21, and you'd heard, there'll be clap outs and kids leave, et cetera. Now they could potentially be in the school district for 1 more year. So if you had a heavily involved student with an out-of-district placement, it could cost that district the cost of that placement now for 1 more year. So that's when, I know that Superintendent Balke talks about unfunded mandates, et cetera. That's always a concern, that now when you add 1 more year on, that you could have it. But the harder part, Frank, is the ones where it's that $200,000 out-of-district placement. Some of these other ones where the kids are here, it's a negligible cost, okay?
so hypothetically, if somebody could move into the district and increase that, or somebody could move out of the district.
You got it.
And increase that, and that's really, sounds like just a wild card.
It is a total wild card, and I'll throw you one more wild card, and that's, we have laws now at the federal level, McKinney-Vento, which is homeless students. So you could have a homeless student that is associated with Goffstown or has some sort of an affiliation, and then we're on that. You have foster situations, which are sometimes complicated, where which district has the responsibility of payment. We deal with this every day. We have split custodies, we've got, you name it, we've got it going on. So it is, your word is perfect. It is the extreme wild card on this particular, on that line.
Yes, Laura.
Is line 93 similar? The amount is far less, but that's tuition as well?
I'm sorry.
Oh, line
Line
93.
93.
It's far lower than the other line, but it's tuition.
So that is for public, I believe, so hold on. Public, so these are then not a private type facility. We send some kids to other schools that might offer a specialized program. So some schools might have like an autism type program, and we might send them there, but they're a public school.
Okay.
Thank you.
Scott, just to clarify, when you were talking about those residentials, those are only residentials with schools associated, correct? That's what these fundings, right? So not a kid just placed in a residential, but
It
still comes to
depends.
school here.
No, sometimes it could be a residential placement as well. Yeah, which has an educational component to it.
Right, it has to have an educational
Yeah,
component
yeah.
for us to
Yes.
ask for money from the school districts.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
everyone knows, you're not paying for the placement, you're paying for, essentially for the education piece of the placement.
And many times that it could include them staying overnight. Those are the ones
Yes.
that are the most expensive.
Right.
A lot of them are just day placements, where we provide that transportation
Right.
to that facility, and then they come back that same day.
Right, I just wanted to
And
clarify for
that's
people
the
that were listening.
lion's share of them.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on page 4? Hearing none, move on to page 5. Are there any questions on page 5? Yes, Frank?
Yes, I have a question, line 105. Health insurance looks like it's decreased by about 33%. Can you address why that has happened?
Yeah, so in these situations, we plan on where that individual is right now, and then we plan 1 year ahead based upon what plan they might have. In this particular situation, from what I can discern, it is a plan change. So you could have somebody who needed a family plan, and now they only need a 2-person, so it goes down. Or consequently, it could go up, what we talked about before, the other way around.
Okay.
But in this particular case, it looks like it went from a family plan to, it was a change of plans.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank. Any other questions on page 5? No? Moving on to page 6. If at any time you need to go back a page, just let me know. Raise your hand. We'll go back. Thank you. Yes, Stacy.
Line 127, I know it's only $502, but I think when we met for the presentation, it was supposed to go down 104 for retirement. Am I mixing something up? It's a different line here, but maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing.
It's also, it could be, you are correct in the sense that our teacher retirement contribution went down slightly for FY '24-25. But it's based upon the salary of that individual. So if that individual's salary or person in that position is making a higher amount, it might, based upon the dollar amount there, Stacy,
Yep.
that could very well be the case. It's a percentage off of the salary of that individual that's slotted in that particular function.
Okay, and I apologize, I think I was looking at your presentation was talking about retirement at the 1100 at the regular education, and this
It's the
we're talking
same.
about.
It's the retirement for teachers overall slightly decreased for FY '24, and then again for the following year. So, but it's still a percentage off of the salary amount. And if the salary amount went up, it could still, even though the overall rate went down, it could still see an increase.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on page 6? No? Hearing none, let's move on to page 7. Yes, Fred?
Line 154, non-capital software, jump from 2023 budget, 47,400, to
Yep.
76,850.
Yeah, so that is what, so earlier, Fred, I think it was Stacy was asking, where is Schoology? So Schoology, we talked about Schoology earlier, that
I'm
learning.
sure you did, but it's.
Right, it was the learning management, that was it was grant funded for a couple of years, and now it's part of our operating budget, and that accounts for about $23,000 of that increase. And then the rest was just all of the other software packages that we use, such as PowerSchool, School Messenger. We do e-registration, e-collect, and we have, they're called plugins, which basically integrate or have interoperability between software packages. All of those increase their rates. So the Schoology represents the largest part of that increase, and then it's just rate, price increases in the other software lines.
Tell me that there's savings in headaches and parent interactions.
Yeah, so, with respect to,
We're getting there.
I would say let's actually go to some of the parents on here, and I think Ms. Dukas represented it very well.
We're getting there. We're not there yet.
I also use Schoology for my son who's now in the middle school.
Yeah,
And,
like great grandkids of that age, so, yeah. Great grandkids. So-
well, we
so-
think they're fantastic friends.
so we're in our first year of Schoology implementation, so we do have to certainly, we've got a lot of bugs to iron out, but just to give you one example though, we use what's called PowerSchool e-registration. In the old days, we would send out, 3,000 packets. If you had multiple kids, you had to put the emergency contact number, all their medical stuff, fill it out. The paper form would come back in, and then we'd have a secretary who'd key everything in. And we're talking about, I can't tell you, an incredible amount of time and effort. We weren't done sometimes until mid to late October, re-entering everything in. Now, it's, the parent goes into PowerSchool, they only update what has changed, and it integrates seamlessly with our data. So it allows us to be much more efficient. So that's, on that e-reg part. But the Schoology piece is where all of the curriculum materials are located, and it's that, hopefully, once we get it all, trained and worked out, it might take a year or two to do that, but it will be a robust system where everything is stored.
I can tell you as a parent, I can't talk to the seamless part, but I can tell you for registrations and things, it does make it a lot faster, and Schoology does make it easier for me to access scheduling and grades, et cetera. I think it's a benefit to me as a parent. That's my opinion on it. Samantha, you had a question?
Thank you. So I noticed, everything from kind of 155 down, it's coded as 2130, which is health. So it doesn't look like we've got a health teacher, right? Because there's no salary for them.
It's the nurse, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought maybe that was like the health
Yeah.
department.
And just a reminder, this is at the district level, so each school, you see the the location, which is the third column. It's triple zeros right now. This is at the district level that we use to basically cover everything within the district. When we get to the schools, it will represent like 101 or 102. Those would be the elementary schools. So you'll see some of those later on for those particular nurses within the school system.
Okay. I guess my question was more maybe suited specifically to line 165, where there's no budget for any other part of this 2130 other than other professional services.
Yeah, I can explain that. So we use Dartmouth Hitchcock as our medical consultant on cases. So we have kids some of them have medical needs, and we have to consult with the doctor as to how we might administer medication, et cetera. So our nurses and our SAU have to consult with a physician, and that's the line where we have an agreement with Dartmouth Hitchcock where we can consult with doctors and nurses at their level on how we can best serve our students at the schools.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions on page 7? Hearing none, let's move on to page 8. Are there any questions on page 8? Yes, Evelyn.
Just a clarification on line 187.
187?
Non-teacher retirement, is that support staff? Well, if this is, no, this is the district office, so.
Yeah, so
IT.
in this, a non-teacher more than likely could be an IT person. They don't have a teacher certification, but yet they're a professional level. So on that one, I believe that is the case on that particular.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it requires a teacher certification, then you pay the teacher rate of retirement. If it doesn't require a teacher certification, then it's non-teacher retirement. And I'm the only exception to that in the entire, like, I'm under teacher retirement, and I don't know why, but and I'm the only, like, the business administrators, that's the weirdest thing, but they classify me as a teacher.
Scott, it almost sounded like you were bragging there for a moment.
No, because I have to pay more for it, and it doesn't make sense to me. I'm not teaching anything.
I understand.
So, it's a
Thank
beef-
you,
It's a beef
Evelyn.
that I have.
When are you retiring?
What?
Ask you the same question.
Retire from the state.
Are there any other questions on page 8?
Maybe Tuesday, that's right.
Yes, Samantha?
Thank you. So line 173, I know it's district salaries, and I know I'm looking from like 22 to 23, that it went from 164 to 428, but it's continuing to stay high. Like, I'm sure we talked about this last year, but I wasn't here.
From a policy perspective, we thought it appropriate to take all of the potential pools at the school level and put them in the district line. So we're not going to be seeing that at the school, individual schools anymore.
Okay.
It's tech. This is your tech.
Okay.
All your tech people. And the new part of it is simply with the market that we're in. We have
Yeah,
to
it's
make
just more of
adjustments
a, it's a
to it.
consolidation of other
Oh,
lines
yeah,
altogether.
that
Okay.
explains the 400%.
Just like,
yeah.
wow, we hired a whole bunch of people.
Are there any other questions on page 8? No? Moving on to page 9? Yes, Fred?
Yes, line 196, school board stipends. How many school board members are there?
There are 9 school board members. I think, yes,
That's
9.
correct.
Okay, so divide 26,063 by 9.
About $2,000 a year.
That doesn't add up.
It's a little more. And you
Because of
and
the.
you also pay the chair
The
more.
chair and vice chair get more money than the rest, so.
Oh, interesting.
Wait a minute.
Does that answer your question?
It does, but where's the board budget committee stipends?
That would be in the town budget.
Yes.
Next
The-
question. Huh?
The truth of the matter is that the budget committee it's under the town budget, but that's under their purview. So I just leave it at that. I served on this committee a while, and that came up in certain conversations. It would not appear here, but it would appear on the town side, and I would really support that myself
And next
personally.
question.
Next line now, 197.
197?
Yeah, so this.
What is the stipends and
So this is actually for the moderator during our deliberative session, as well as paying for our secretary.
Yeah, but they used to get $200 or something like that. It's just 75.86.
That's a month.
So,
No.
Yeah, for the
period.
moderator, it's not very much, but specifically, we are taking minutes more at our subcommittee levels as well.
Ah, okay.
So if we look at it, the $2,400 specifically is for our secretary recording the minutes at our subcommittees, at our SAU, or not the SAU, but at our subcommittees, and then paying her for the extra time because we go until 10:30 at night for our items.
So I just want to let you know, our notes show 8 meetings at $150 per meeting for a subcommittee, and then there's 2 subcommittees. It is our curriculum and education subcommittee, and those meetings can be 2 to 3 hours sometimes. And then the other one is the, what is that? Not planning communications.
Not AFC. But these are also committees that we think that it's important that the general public gets those meeting minutes, so they can understand what we're talking about from a curriculum level, so that we have transparency and the policy discussions that we have at
My
the subcommittee
advice is
level.
to have fewer meetings.
I don't disagree, but they're all important.
Well, thank you for the clarification. Are there any other questions on page 9? I think Fred jumped into that one pretty quickly. Does anyone else have any questions? No? Hearing none, let's move on to page 10.
Yes.
Yes, Fred?
I see the jump in 239 management services. That's probably a plethora of stop covering in that? What is minimum services?
So that is your SAU assessment. And as I explained during the presentation, it's not so much that the SAU's budget went up by 150,000. It's the formula in which the assessment is apportioned.
Boston versus Goffstown?
Correct.
New
So-
Boston versus Goffstown?
Right. So it is, that formula is based upon statute, and it's based upon the numbers of students that are, it's called ADMA, average daily membership and attendance, and it's also based upon your equalized assessed valuation. So Goffstown's equalized assessed valuation skyrocketed this past year, went up, I believe it was 15 or 16%. And that's based upon home sales in Goffstown. New Boston had just done their reval, so theirs had, the previous year went up like 34%. So the prior year, New Boston's assessment was higher. So it's a number that's gonna fluctuate every single year. So next year, Goffstown is gonna go through a reval, and probably what we're gonna see is a redistribution. So it's not consistent. If the only way it would be consistent is if New Boston and Goffstown were on the same reval cycle, which we're not. So I think you'll see more of a stabilization next year when we go through our revaluation.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on page 10? Lost my voice there for a second. No? Hearing none, let's move on to page 11.
Sarah,
Yes, Fred?
260 data communications, $4,000 jump on a 35,000, 2023. And the reason is?
410, hold on.
I have the right number, 2410 data communications.
Yeah, so there are three components to that. Content filtering, which is firewall for bad stuff that hopefully we don't want students to see. It is internet service, which is consolidated communication, and then also a wireless maintenance agreement. And unfortunately, all three of those providers increased their rates.
Sign of the times, isn't it?
What?
It's a sign of the times, isn't it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Fred. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Fletcher?
I'm looking at page 12.
Page 12? We're on page 11.
I'll do it when I get there.
Okay. Any other questions on page 11? No, we'll move on to page 12, and Mr. Fletcher.
I'm just looking at 269, reference 269, function
Yep, I got it.
2620. It says stipend.
Yep, I got that.
It seems like in the past, the stipend has been pretty low compared to what you requested now. And I suppose that's,
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we added a stipend for our custodial and maintenance staff to carry a cell phone on the weekends and after hours. So I'm sure you all know we had water damage at our schools, and alarms go off. People have to come down here, and as part of the collective bargaining agreement with our support staff, we agreed to give custodians who have to be on duty, essentially. So if you're on duty and you're carrying that cell phone, you can't go to a party. You have to be able to respond. You can't be out of town, and you have to be, you're on call. So if an alarm goes off at any one of our schools, that person has to respond to determine like why. And it could be a security alarm. It could be anything, a sensor. It could be water sensor. You name it. We've got obviously a lot of buildings, and that's the price that we're paying to have on-call staff.
Any other questions on page 12?
And that's both, that's That's a $3,000 cost for that piece. The other piece is the mileage that we have to pay for individuals because they use their own car to go back and forth to buildings and stuff.
Thank you for the explanation, Scott. Any other questions on page 12? No, we'll move on to page 13. Yes, Evelyn.
Okay, here's the, I don't know, the whatever in the room, student transportation. Don't they have a clause to, an increased clause or something with you? And I know they're only providing like minimal buses.
And that's why I didn't do it. So, it's for everyone's benefit here, we're looking at line 428. All right. Sorry, wrong budget,
302.
sorry. 302, 302, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one.
303
Yeah.
Phew,
I
302.
apologize. So you're going to see in lines 302 as an example, I level funded that. You are correct. We have a 3% escalator in that. In light of the fact that I'm contractually obligated to pay up to 22 buses, I kept it flat. Right now, we're operating between 15 to 17 buses, depending upon the situation. We're trying to get more bus drivers. We've got a lot of buses that are overcrowded. So I think that in future years, as we renegotiate a contract, I think we're going to cut a couple of routes, 2 to 3 routes. But I have to, if they find the drivers, we're going to do it. The other flip side, I kept it flat, was in our contract, we have what's called a fuel mitigation, there's a cap. And with diesel so expensive right now, we have to pay, we get a discounted rate because we are a municipality governmental agency, but anything over $1.50 a gallon, and then don't think of what diesel is to the average consumer, because we get it less, but we have to pay that difference. So we typically budget about $55,000 for what's called increased fuel costs. We could be looking at like $100,000 to $150,000 this year. So I'm going to use some of that budget to kind of pay for that. So I kept it flat because I can't make it less, but I'm certainly not making it more, if that makes sense. Okay. And then on the special ed side, this one, we are having success with Durham special ed transportation in terms of having the right number of buses. We have to provide, when I mentioned before about out-of-district placements, it was with Frank, is that we're transporting kids all over the place, and that we're fortunate enough to have those drivers, and in that, there is that escalator in that contract of 3%. So we're taking kids all the way from Lakes Region down to Massachusetts and everywhere in between, as well as our inter-district special ed kids.
Yes, Mr. Fletcher.
It's my interpretation that you're using like 3 different companies for this?
We use predominantly 2 companies. So it's Goffstown Truck Center. They're actually owned by what's called Student Transportation of America, STA. We use Durham Transportation. And then we have had to use other providers for special ed where, to give you a good example, we partner with a couple of surrounding towns. So we have a little agreement with, say, Bedford and other towns where if they have a kid and then we have a kid, we work together. So we pick up a kid in Bedford, we pick up a kid here, and then we go up to the Lakes region, and then we split the cost. So, which has helped us and helps them. So we have some of those, and those are some of them might not be Durham, that might be another provider. So I think we have a total of 4 that we use, but 2 predominantly, which is Durham and STA.
So student transportation is kind of confusing because there's 3 of them on a road there, and you think, what's going on?
Oh, you're talking about The other one is 2790. This is more for, is that homeless transportation?
Yeah,
Yeah, homeless transportation. So this is, again, part of that new law where if a student identifies as being, this is their residence, Goffstown, we might potentially have to transport them. And, yeah, so that's another, had some of that too.
Okay, thank you. Lauren, did you have a question?
I do, thank you. Line 292, was that vehicle maintenance thing that you said was an error and got
Yeah,
removed?
that's exactly it,
Okay,
where we
'cause-
needed to put the money in the budget in the proper spot for vehicle maintenance, tires, those types of things,
Okay.
and we were not in the right spot.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on page 13? No, let's move on to page 14.
Mr. Chair, just as a note, what you're seeing here on line 323 is the completion of our district lines. So if we wanted to have any kind of stops for the days, we'd probably want to do it after those conglomerates. So as we move location 000 to 101, that's when we're going to start going into the school. So just as a placeholder for yourself to notate, should we stop, should we continue? Of course, my recommendation is we should probably go into 101 for at least this meeting.
How many are in 101?
It's a lot less. I think once we've gone through the district, I think the district's the toughest. I think really the schools are a lot thicker, but that's just my experience. But I'd say let's finish at least this part.
101 ends on page 23.
You might be able to go further.
I think we can probably finish that before 8. If anyone has any objection to moving on past 101, just
I'd say at least, Mr. Chair, let's finish lines 314 to 322, and then we can have, see if we want to move forward. If there's any questions on those lines to round out the district.
perfect. Yes, Scott?
I wanted to, with so many, new faces, I wanted to share with you, why do you see $1 in some of these lines? So based upon New Hampshire Department of Revenue Administration and laws, appropriation laws, both the school and the town have to have $1 in a particular, in this case we call it a function, where we're able to spend from. If we don't have, so when I submit forms to the state and the school board signs off on that, I have to have $1 in certain lines that will allow me to then do a budget transfer into them. So it's common practice for school districts and municipalities to put $1 as a placeholder, which gives them that statutory authority to spend from that particular function line. So you're not going to see $1 in every single one of these 1,500 lines, but there are about 25 or so different functions that I have to put at least $1 in them if I anticipate that we might ever spend from them. So some might say, why do you need $1 in land and improvements? Well, if Bill Cordes wins Powerball on Saturday and says, hey, I want to build a new elementary school over here, I might not be able to do that because I don't have a $1 budgeted. So it's weird stuff like that you have to kind of plan for. And thank you, Bill, for your generous.
He's going to split it with all of us.
Yes.
so-
Be Bill Cordes Elementary.
Okay. So let's move on to page 14, guys. And girls. Women. It's just a bad phrase. We need to get rid of it.
I do have a question.
Yes, Stacy.
So this doesn't have to do with this budget right here, but one of the schools talked about having hearing speakers in their school. Why is that not carried by the town? And why is it, by the district and put on the school? Do you know what I'm talking about?
You're talking about sound amplification?
I remember one of the
systems?
schools, and I'm sure we'll get there, talked about.
Yeah, there's several. I mean,
Yeah.
we have it.
Why is it carried by each school and not by the district?
Part of it is based upon the fact that the state wants to be able to compare how expenditures are spent at different schools or school levels. So when it's at the district level, I have to distribute district expenses on state forms based upon, say, student population. But when I know that Maple Avenue needs, say, sound amplification systems, and the middle school needs them, and the high school needs them, it just demonstrates to the state that those are the different types of schools where it's going to. When it's district, it's kind of gray.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, are there any questions on page 14?
So, Mr. Chair, just as a note, we're going to be moving into location 101, which is the Bartlett School. So all of the lines and functions that we're seeing are budgets that we're looking, or expenditures we're looking at Bartlett School specifically.
All right, let me segregate it a little here. Any questions on the ones marked 000 at the top before we move into Bartlett School? So let's address those questions first. None? Okay, then we'll move on to the ones in 101, in location code 101. Any questions for those lines? Seeing none, let's move on to page 15. Yes, Fred?
But just from 346 through 352, why all the breakup in general supplies into so many categories?
Good question. So if you look at column 5, which says program, program relates to the particular curriculum or content area. So for an example, you might see general supplies 05, I know off the top of my head is math.
Good for you.
And, yeah.
05 English.
It's English.
It's not
There you go.
math.
Saturday.
We believed you.
What's math? 02?
11.
11?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it just breaks it down, Fred, into like, what are we spending for supplies for physical education, English, math, that type of thing, rather than making it one big, and again, it goes back to this comparative thing. So if you want to determine what does the school district of Bedford spend on math supplies
for the elementary schools,
you'd be able to know.
Yeah. So it's a lot more detailed because it's broken down, but it's really at the state, the state requires it as part of our documentation.
It's the legislature oftentimes, Jared, that asks those questions, and then they make someone.
We mean legislators, I tell you.
Yes, Samantha?
On line 343, equipment rental, I guess my question is whatever we're renting for the past couple of years, is it the same price? Is it cheaper if we just bought it?
So these are predominantly like, so we have laptops that we lease, purchase.
Okay.
And the reason why it's been why it's kind of flat is that because we got this grant and we switched from Apples to PCs, we've been able to procure more, through that lease. So we've been able to keep that level. So we do.
But it's grant funded.
I'm sorry?
You said it's grant?
No, not grant funded.
No.
We got a grant. We got a $400 per device grant, and with that, we were able to lease, purchase more devices, all within that 545 number. So in the past, that was the lease purchase price for teacher-only laptops.
Okay.
Now, we've been able to level fund that and now provide it to paraprofessionals in that particular school and occupational therapy. We can do more than just, we're spending our money more broadly with that same amount of money. But that one is simply our laptop leases, and it might be.
This also includes our copiers.
Copiers
So
as
our
well.
scanners at the school, we don't own those. We prefer to lease those out because they break, they get old. And by leasing them, we're making sure that, we have the appropriate repairs and we have up-to-date technology as we move forward.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on page 15? Yes, Evelyn?
Yeah, just to clarify on that 37,545, about how many a year are you able to add in here? Or is that a multi-year?
It is multi-year. We are going, our newest one is a 3-year, lease purchase with an interest rate of under 3.5%. But I don't know the exact number of what Bartlett is. I don't. I mean, I have to pull up our contracts. We did this lease purchase for all of the schools, and then it is broken down by when we pay the bill. I just don't know that off the top. I'd have to look that up.
But this part of the bill is specifically for Bartlett School.
It's Bartlett, and it's also our copiers.
So if I'm looking, and I know that some of you don't have the notes, so if I'm looking at it from a cost breakdown perspective, the laptop lease program is $29,395. That's $29,395. The copier maintenance agreement that we have is $7,150, 7150. And then managed print, which is our toner for all that, is $1,000.
So
Thank you, Jerry.
I guess my question more so is, are you paying the 37,545 for the same unit to pay it off over 3 years? Is that how it works?
It would be the number that Jared gave before, the 29.
Right,
and
the
change.
29,395.
Right, over the course of 3 years, we'd be paying that amount of money for that lease purchase of, I don't know the number of
Let's
exact
just-
laptops. Let's say it's
just
50 or something, whatever it is,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Fred, did you have a question?
Yeah, with respect to laptops, I look around the room and there's obviously, let's say, a bias towards one source. Are there cheaper alternatives that will do the same thing?
I'm actually going to let Mr. Gross talk about this because he is very excited about the lift that he did this past year from Apples to other things.
So we've been predominantly Apple, and it took a little while, but we are switching over towards PCs, which is mostly HP, Dell, and other manufacturers. So I know that people do like an Apple, but it happens to be significantly a greater price. It also has significant repair costs to them. So we are migrating over to PCs. So our teachers will no longer have an Apple laptop. They're going to be getting I think it's an HP. They're getting pretty much what I have here. Same thing with our student laptops. Some of them...
To me, an Apple has a cool factor to it, but it's not really simpler than the PCs necessarily. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, so I think we've recognized that. I mean, and one of the things that we see in this is our IT spend is big, and we've got to try to maximize that. And this going to HPs was a mitigation of our IT costs. So yes, it's going to save us money, but we got to spend so much money on Wi-Fi and servers, and we got to save some money, and this was the way to do it.
No argument.
Thank you, Fred. Anybody else have questions?
If you said it earlier, I missed it, sorry.
Anybody else have questions on page 15?
I have one.
Yes, Laura.
Line 354, books and printed media, are those student resources, teacher resources, or does that combine?
It would be both,
Okay.
but mostly student.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions on page 15? Yes, Evelyn.
All right, so if that books and printed media are resources, your general supplies for the English language arts, I just want a little more clarification on what those general supplies are.
Which line is this now?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's line 347.
Sometimes the staff put what they buy, sometimes they don't. You might see, it wouldn't necessarily, be books, but I'm trying to think of some of the things that teachers buy?
Yeah, these are the codable curriculum materials for $2,658.
Okay.
As well as some others, miscellaneous literacy
More
supplies.
consumable, so.
Wonderworks.
If you have like a workbook type of thing, it's considered a consumable, not so much a textbook. So, in that 611 supply line, it's, will something be used up in a given year? So if you have like a math workbook or a vocabulary workbook, it technically should be
All right.
611. And again, like I said before, every single year, it's like, oh, you coded that wrong, it was a 611, should have been a 641. It's like, it happens, and
Okay.
we try to clean it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on page 15? Hearing none, let's move on to page 16. Any questions on page 16? Yes, Lauren?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, could I go back to 15? I know we got excited to move on.
Of course.
Slow. Thank you. Line 359 for the new equipment of 3,500, I'm just not seeing the correlation, the note on the noteworthy changes.
Okay, hold on.
I'm not remembering what that was. I'm from the presentation.
Hold on.
I know, I said flip.
Gaga Pit.
Gaga ball. All right, I'm on board.
Gaga what?
Gaga ball.
Yeah, who can explain this better?
It's playground equipment.
It's like a oh, can I explain?
Yes,
I'm
please.
excited, thank you.
You
It's
have
like,
one at the
it's a
house?
little outdoor pit of a kinder, gentler dodgeball.
Oh. It's not the pits?
It usually involves like some wooden boards, or you can have plastic and metal boards where it's like literally a little octagon, they smack balls at each other.
Or it's when Lady Gaga and Brad Pitt get
Oh,
married.
thank you, yeah. Thank you.
Gaga ball. I gotcha. No, I just didn't see the note, thank you.
Moving on to page 16. Thank you. Yes, Evelyn?
Line 368?
368?
Yeah, paraprofessionals aren't covered under the teacher contract, are
This is a 1,200 line. This is special ed, and Bartlett has
Okay.
exceptional needs more than our other schools.
Without spelling it out, that's because it's closer to Manchester and some of that stuff.
I am not going to comment on that.
Okay. But yes.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Any other questions on page 16? No? Hearing none, let's move on to 17. Any questions on page 17? No? Hearing none, let's move on to page 18.
So just as a refresher, on the bottom of page 18, it's nurse health is 2130 is health / nurse, and our supply line, we have gotten a lot of free stuff through COVID, and that's going away. And we also have a AED device that needs to get replaced at Bartlett due to age. That's the one that's in the new equipment one.
Are there any questions on page 18? No? Hearing none, let's move on to page 19. Any questions on page 19? No questions, we'll move on to page 20. Any questions on page 20? Yes, Samantha?
So is the online 476 to 477, is that just, I noticed like they're both like one is minus 870, but then the other is plus?
Yeah, that was furniture for our media center. We're moving
Okay.
it to a different, correct line.
Okay.
Like, that's one of those cleanup items that Scott talked
Okay,
about.
yeah.
Thank you, Samantha. Are there any other questions on page 20? No, moving on to page 21.
Didn't think I could shut up, did you?
I had my doubts. No, you have excellent questions, Fred, and we're glad you're here. Thank you. Are there any questions on page 21? No? Moving on to page 22. Again, if anybody needs to go back a page, just let me know.
I will just say I reviewed the first four pages I missed, no questions.
Thank you. Any questions on page 22? No questions? We'll move on to page 23.
Ms. Chair, this will bring us to the end of Bartlett, and then we will be moving on to Maple with the last three lines.
Thank you, Jared. Just in advance, I believe we should probably finish Bartlett and end this for this evening. And I'll be looking for a motion then.
Do you want to go
keep
3 more
going?
pages from Maple?
Yeah. Do you want to just, yeah, you might want to just keep going until you hit like 8 o'clock or something.
It's 3 pages.
3 pages?
3 more.
Okay.
No,
Well,
I have 5.
Yeah, I have one.
Oh, I was taking Scott's word for it.
So 10.
So it was wrong.
Scott, no codes, no right codes, wrong number of pages?
Good one.
So
You
it's
said it's 3 pages, it's 5 pages, front and back is actually 10.
I didn't say 3.
Oh, we said 3.
I did,
Oh.
and I'm wrong, as usual.
I thought it was Scott, sorry.
Little
Kelly blamed you.
ventriloquy.
I
over
was
there.
Kelly.
Yes, Samantha.
Line 541, we're doing negative repairs. We're saving money on repairs.
No, it was just something, we're trying to get things in the right spots. So that particular one.
I thought that would be kind of fun. If like we did a repair and it started generating us money.
Nope, that was,
If we struck oil or something.
when I go through this budget, you know, it's again, 1,500 lines. That,
Yeah.
to me, I saw a mistake there.
Yeah, no,
So
I'm-
it was, I think it was for like telephone repairs or something. That was the note. I'm like, we don't, that's in the district line, so I cut it. So it's part of the cleanup sometimes when
Yeah.
you go through it.
I feel like, I want to apologize if I sound like I'm nitpicking.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's,
We're supposed to do something.
yeah, it's your job, so.
It's literally your job to ask questions. You're doing a great job. Okay, any other questions on page 23 down to the next school? So excluding the bottom 3 lines. Hearing no questions, are there any questions about the bottom 3 lines which start a new school?
That would be Maple.
That'd be Maple Ave, and we're gonna continue past into Maple Ave. So it's 5 pages, right?
10.
What?
It keeps
Because
changing.
it's double
It's
stack.
5 pages, but front and back is 10.
Well, we have 20 minutes till 8 o'clock.
We can do it.
We can do this. We can do hard things, guys. let's move on. So, any questions about the bottom 3 lines on page 23? Hearing none, let's move on to page 24. Thank you, Jared, for your page prompts, school prompts, appreciate that. Are there any questions on page 24? Yes, Evelyn.
Kind of a weird question, but there are no language arts supplies in Maple Ave?
It's possible that they might put a lot under, say, general supplies. If you'll see on that line, that's by far the lion's share of their supplies. And
Just for reference, can we get a line number?
Well, there is
It's a
line.
lack
There
of
isn't
line.
one.
Oh, there's no line at all.
For program
Thank you.
05, which is language arts, there's no general supplies under language arts.
so
But
some schools
they're-
tend to
Group them
Line.
group
together?
them together under
18.
18, yeah, which is kind of the all-encompassing one.
It's on the next page.
Thank you.
Because their math is line 575. is- How many more students are there in Maple Ave than at Bartlett?
Considerable
There are
amount.
200 roughly at Bartlett and 520-ish. at- Yeah, I think.
Lauren and I just went through this.
Am I close on that?
You are.
Yeah.
I handed out flyers.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on page 24? Yes, Samantha?
On page 5, or I'm sorry, line 570 with the equipment rental, what are we renting? Is it
Same.
still laptops and
Same thing.
copiers and things?
Same exact thing.
Okay.
Yep. Just, there's more because that's school,
This
it's
bigger
more
school,
teacher, bigger
yeah.
school.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on page 24? Hearing none, let's move on to page 25. Are there any questions on page 25? Yes, Frank?
Question, line 601, 317,000 fiscal year '24 base. Why such a big jump?
More than likely, we have more special education teachers that are there. So we talked about repurposing a couple of positions. So I have to look back in my notes, Frank, but if we did that and we repurposed special ed teachers, then that would account for, we might have, potentially 2 or 3 health plans that are additional to that.
Okay.
It also, the tricky part on this one, where I don't feel comfortable giving you what I feel is a confident answer, is what I never know is, do we have a staff of, are there 5 people, all who took single, and all of a sudden somebody got married, somebody had kids, and I just never know that when it comes to things like health insurance, or I just don't. And I'd have to go and I'd have to do a much deeper dive, and I couldn't answer that question, spontaneously. at a
Yep, no,
meeting.
that was it. My question was this. I know from the industry, it wasn't just an increase in rates, so it must have been a
No, no.
function of
Anytime
having more bodies
Yeah,
being
anytime we
insured
see
with that.
something like that, it's attributed to additional bodies or changes of plans
Okay.
typically, and that's both up and down.
And I'd like to add to that comment.
Yes,
because
Evelyn?
we experienced the same issue at Town Hall. When the employee has the ability to change a plan mid-season, you don't know that ahead of time. So
Mhm.
it can either go up or down, and that's out of your control. Plus, Scott already mentioned that they had a significant rate increase.
Yeah, the main reason was that when you go from 23 budget to 24 base, it's
Right.
significant.
Yeah,
So
there's no way to know
that's just
until
the-
that happens.
yeah, it's a recipe of those factors.
Yeah.
Moving target.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on page 25? No? Hearing none, let's move to page 26.
Question.
Yes. Laura.
In the last three lines, 623 to 625, there's none of the tuition is listed, as that's because it's all taken care of in the district?
District
Okay.
line. And
So it should be blank for all the schools then?
Yes,
Okay.
and that's another one of these cleanup things. So next year, I'll probably just delete the
Those
lines,
lines.
so I don't have 1,535, I'll have 1,530. So yes, that's-
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Are there any other questions on page 26? Hearing none, let's move to page 27. Are there any questions on page 27? Hearing none, let's move to page 28. I have a question, Scott.
Yeah.
Could you just review, I know we did it, the change in the testing. Could you explain the increase in testing?
Mine is right, wasn't that?
It was headsets.
Headsets.
That was the headset.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on page 28? Hearing none, we'll move on to page 29. Yes, Evelyn.
Line 683, paraprofessional salaries, but it looks like that's a district expense?
This is the lunch monitors.
Yep.
So putting the lunch monitors within the schools, our paraprofessionals are doing that. So that was,
Yeah, I just want to clarify, the account title is part, when we build a chart of accounts, sometimes whoever built it, it doesn't always perfectly suit things, but these are lunch monitors, and essentially what we're trying to accomplish here is we have pretty high student counts in the classrooms, and with that there are a certain number of duties, lunch duty being one of them. So we're trying to help the teachers specifically at Maple with managing their day better, knowing that some of them have classes of up to 25 students in them. So by having this, it'll give the teachers an additional time to prepare with all these extra kids. So that was the rationale behind it. It's also part of the teacher collective bargaining agreement, which I think was for next year, but we're trying to get this in there so teachers have more breathability, especially with the high.
Right, so the paras are doing lunch duty.
Yes. Right, yeah, it's para level, even though there are individuals who will help during the lunch periods. yeah.
So are they only there at lunchtime?
Yeah, yep.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on page 29? No, hearing none, let's move on to page 30. Are there any questions on page 30? No? Hearing none, let's move on to page 31.
I'm sorry. just
Yes,
to
Samantha?
Circle back. So I noticed on, going like on a little far back, on 25, we have secretary salaries, and I didn't question it because it was in the 1200s and it's special education, but then I noticed we also have secretary salaries on page 30 as well, and I'm just wondering like why are they separated?
Because
They're in the same school.
we have a secretary at Maple Avenue School who's specifically dedicated to supporting students with special education services.
Okay.
We also have a secretary whose primary job is to support the administrative function of the school. So that's why you'll see that. So that particular special education secretary, we have a certain number of students at that school who have what's called IEPs, individual education plans. You have to coordinate meetings with parents and providers, and there's a lot of that scheduling that kind of goes on. There's a lot of reporting that has to get done to the state, SAU, et cetera. So that's what that individual does. And we have to, as Jared mentioned before, because we have to do put everything in the right bucket so that the state can know. We just can't say that we have secretaries in one line. We have to break it out. Special ed, if that's all they do, and that's what we have to say. It's special ed only.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on page 30? Hearing none, let's move on to 31. Are there any questions on page 31? Hearing none, let's move on to page 32. Are there any questions on page 32? Yes, Fred.
The answer is no, but I have one way back on 21.
Okay, go back.
Line 482, assistant principal salary. Why so low?
We have two of them.
Okay.
I'm sorry, they're split. So she works both at Bartlett and at Glen Lake School. So you'll see that when we go to 103, is that right?
This is also in function 2410, so.
That's administration.
Yeah, so, the program, yeah.
No, so we split an assistant principal between Bartlett and Glen Lake School, and it's proportioned, so that person's salary and benefits are distributed between those two schools. So when you hit the 103 school, which is Glen Lake, you'll see the other piece
I can add
of that.
the other half.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking that we're still on Maple with, sorry about that.
Thank you, Fred. Are there any other, are there questions now on page 32?
So see how slow I am? 12 pages back.
Worth the wait, Fred. So, hearing no questions on page 32, let's move on to page 33. And go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, I would say, Ms. Chair, just, you're gonna see on line 789, this is the totality of the Maple School. The last four lines are, location 103, which is Glen Lake. Though it's the board's prerogative, I would recommend that we continue on into Glen Lake, because it's as quick as another elementary school.
How many pages?
It's 8 pages.
So 16.
No, I can go to both sides.
Okay. So 8.
It's 8. So we'll carry on through this one. Yes,
Madam
Fred?
Chair, it's close to 8, I'd just not do it. but it's, let the majority prevail. But I would ask the, Madam Chair, with respect to Budget Committee budget, are we so tight that we can't have new name tags for the 2 new members of the committee?
Kathy's on vacation,
Okay.
but I will make something special for the 2 of them for next week so that you feel better, Fred.
So now we'll have to budget for sparkles. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay, so moving on to page 33.
Can I ask a 32 question?
At 30, certainly.
On page
We'll go
30.
back one page.
A
That's
page
fine.
32 question.
Of course.
Line 764, I just noticed that in 2021, like our repairs were at 26,000 and now they've doubled and they kind of stayed high. Like what did we fix that's like so expensive? And or is it because the kids like weren't in school in 2021 or something that they didn't break anything?
No, I think.
They needed to get fixed?
I think the example that I would provide to you is consider your own homes, right? So sometimes, you might have things are breaking down more, like appliances, etc. Then you have a couple of good years, and then you go, oh my God, now I got to replace the roof or a driveway. Or it's very similar in terms of, I can't say specifically, Samantha, that in that particular year we didn't do X, Y, and Z. I mean, these things. What happens a lot of times is we could have substantial repairs needed to our heating or our heating system, or there could be some particular plumbing issues, or we had to do a sidewalk repair. I couldn't give you that specificity, but by and large, where I see a lot of our spend for repairs are in our fire suppression sprinkler systems that, we see that plumbing, roof repairs are another one that we do inspections every year, and if they find that there's some problems in a particular section of a roof, they might have to spend $10,000 to fix it, whereas another year they do the inspection and there's something modest where they can just put some tar and fix it. So it just varies a lot. Maintenance is much more predictable because it's usually preventative maintenance, and we kind of plan on inspections and things like that. But on the repair end, it's a crapshoot, kind of what you get. But it ranges from everything from fixing plumbing, electrical, HVAC, roofs, pavement, tile repairs, glass, breakage of glass, fixtures, those types of things, and it just varies greatly from year to year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Samantha. Are there any questions now on page 33? Down to line 789. From there, we'll go into Glen Lake. Are there any questions on the bottom section of page 33? Hearing none, we'll move on to page 34. Are there any questions on page 34? Hearing none, let's move on to page 35. Are there any questions on page 35?
Can I just make a point for, and this might help, on line
Yes,
number
Scott.
825, and then on line 828, and I think it kind of highlights what Frank talked about before, where we had to bring on, say, more paraprofessionals due to needs, but then all of a sudden, you see an increase in salary, and you see the increase in the health insurance piece. So that's why sometimes those two, they fluctuate, and then when kids move from one school to another, depending upon the school, sometimes the need for that para goes from one school to another. Sometimes with Glen Lake, it doesn't. So because more kids come in, that kind of offset that, but a lot of times, like at Mountain View is a good example, we see like that shift where that FTE count kind of goes to the high school, but at Glen Lake, we don't really experience that because we seem to have that pipeline of kids who need services always coming in to fill what left. But that's just a good example of like how fluid this thing is. It's very challenging.
Thank you, Scott.
All right.
Are there any questions on page 35? Hearing none, we'll move on to page 36. Are there any questions on page 36? Hearing none, we'll move on to page 37. Are there any questions on page 37? We'll move on to page 38. Are there any questions on page 38? Hearing none, let's move on to page 39.
Just to notate, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yes.
Fred, this actually goes to your question line 915. That's the other part of the assistant principal that's shared between Bartlett and Glen Lake.
I recognize that, and I did the math. So all in all, it's a reasonable salary.
Thank you, Jerry. Are there any questions on page 39? Hearing none, we'll move on to page 40. Yes, Evelyn.
Line 941, do we have a change in custodial staff? They're not under their own contract, are they?
I think on that one, we have 1.5 people. So remember we talked about how we're repurposing? Because we put that modular classroom and we repurposed a position, but not a full. It was like I think it was like a 0.3 or something like that.
Were they shared between the high school?
We share. I don't, Smith. I don't know like where they're shared with, but I'd have to look back at my notes. But I do know that it's a shared position with other schools.
Picking up more of a share in this case.
Yeah, I mean, we essentially added 4 classrooms, but yet we never increased the custodial support there. So we're basically putting, that's not a full-time position. It's like, I think it's like almost like a quarter or something like that to help out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Evelyn. Are there any other questions on page 40? Hearing none, we'll move on to the...
One, sorry, ma'am.
Yes, Fred?
The jump in line 953 water sewer, 1,700, 2023 budget, it's 30,000.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to, with that modular classroom, obviously we have more water and sewer usage, and trying to hit the actuals. The prior years were, kind of COVID years, and we didn't have, and prior to that, we didn't have it.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to get it to where I think it might be. So that was the reason for that one. for that increase, because we have more square footage.
And you actually have kids in the classroom.
We have kids in it, yeah.
Uh,
More toilets, more sinks, you know.
They're there full-time versus not being there during COVID years
Yeah.
when we put it up.
Thank you, Fred. Are there any other questions on page 40? Hearing none, let's move on to the.
Sorry.
Yes, Evelyn.
The increase in the electricity, is that also based on the?
Usage.
So,
And
line
the-
960?
Yeah, so, yes, like, I always, like, admit to, like, oh boy. So Fred asked me about electricity last year, and I said, okay, I'm gonna take my chances, and, because Fred specifically said, hey, did you what?
Huh?
Fred is R-I-G, no. Fred was-
Did you go out to see
Fred
what
was-
modular, excuse me, what a heat pump system would cost you rather than resistance electricity, which is expensive as hell? Is that it?
No, that wasn't it.
No, he said it. So we would entertain, if you want to add to the budget, the cost of a heat pump, we would entertain doing that.
I would entertain going out for bid, grants and stuff, under efficiency, all that, what's the new name of it? WIP inflation, reducing, the Inflation Reduction Act?
But the cost associated for the $10,000 specifically is the module classroom is 100% electrical. So electric heat, which electricity, as we know, has gone up, and that's what this is for.
And the other biggie is that it's also air conditioning. So now we're having summer school at Glen Lake. Yeah, so kids who have special needs are.
In school all summer.
Yes, not all summer, but.
4 weeks out of the
good-
summer.
4 weeks out of it. And so with that, because that modular classroom has air conditioning and the others don't, they do utilize that space. So the other tricky part with our energy consumption over the last couple of years and actuals, and I mean, I'm extremely challenged by it, is that for COVID protocols, we were asking our teachers to keep windows open for more air circulation. And with that, we were kind of heating the outside, but getting good ventilation.
Or air
So-
conditioning the outside.
Yeah, so it's, this one, I'm monitoring, and I'll just put it to you that way. I'm trying to be conservative in what I think things will be on both the electric and the propane side, but, you know, I'm hopeful that we won't have as many of these, like, open windows as we did, but it was also a viable strategy for many schools and others to do that, to get the airflow going.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions on page 41? We'll be only reviewing down to line 975, that will end Glen Lake, and we will end there for the evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Not yet, we have to do this.
I didn't hear any hands raised, see any hands raised.
Every year.
Every year.
You can't take them anyway.
So, are there any questions on page 41 for lines through to 975? Yes, Lauren?
Thank you very much. Just as an aside, that 900,000 for that modular in 21, did you have to bond that?
No.
No? That was a taxation, or was that a grant?
That was a grant-funded item from ESSER 1?
No.
No, it wasn't ESSER 1, but
It
that
was fiscal capacity, parity, disparity, I don't know what they called it, but it was
Was it
state.
it was a federal grant or state?
State grant, yeah. Yeah, the good news is we didn't have to bond anything for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Are there any other questions on page 41? Hearing, yes, Fred?
Motion to adjourn.
That's not a question. Hearing none, I have one reminder for everyone that we will be meeting on the 10th. Please check your calendars. Please let, our secretary is out of the office. for 2 weeks. I assume someone will be checking her mail, Secretary of Town Hall. But please be sure to include Danielle on your replies if you cannot attend a meeting.
I'm not sure somebody will be checking Catherine's email, because she did ask me to send my correspondence directly to Danielle because she wasn't going to be there.
So please, just for continuity, send it to Catherine, but you should also include Danielle.
You said the 10th, right?
Yes.
So when's the
Do you have
next
a
meeting?
calendar there? Can we just be sure?
Yep, and,
A week from today.
yep, the next meeting's the 10th, and then we have continued school budget on the 15th and the 17th. This is, if needed, is the 17th.
15?
Yep. Yep, it's on the calendar we got sent.
Tuesday.
Essentially, for the rest of November, we're scheduled for Tuesday, Thursdays.
6 p.m. to
Yes.
6 a.m.
My hope is to have us be done and have everyone have a chance to enjoy their Thanksgiving holiday. So with that, I will now take a motion to adjourn.
Someone cut him off. A motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So motion by Samantha, seconded by Evelyn. All in favor, say aye.
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 I move
Any
to adjourn.
opposed?
You're too late now,
Are you opposed, Fred?
Nobody opposed? Thank you all for staying. I appreciate it, and for great questions. And thank you to the school for coming and reviewing this with us.
Pass down your name.